Live. My next guest has been a pro-life leader in the House of Representatives for over 28 years. He has worked tirelessly for human rights and is the ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Would you welcome Chris Smith, Congressman from New Jersey. Thanks for being here. I want to talk about this bill. There was a foreign relations authorization bill, just a spending bill, that was approved this week. You tried to amend some language in there which calls for the creation of something called the Office for Global Women's Issues. Yeah. Tell us, first of all, what is that and what did your amendment seek to do? Well,
the bill could have been very non-controversial. It's a basic bill that funds the U.S. Department of State. The language that was in the bill would establish this Global Office on Women's Issues, which I frankly favor. I actually introduced a bill that had a very large list of things that the office ought to be doing: equal pay for equal work, micro-lending, microcredit lending, and all
women's issues.
Mitigate maternal mortality in the developing world, all the things that we need to be doing foreign policy-wise. And unfortunately, the office, which is already up and running, this gives statutory authority for it. We believe, and this is shared by across the board in the pro-life movement, will be used to coordinate abortion on demand globally. It comes in the context of reversal of the Mexico City policy. $500 million of your taxpayers and my funds are now going to Planned Parenthood and all these organizations overseas as they seek to topple pro-life laws in Latin America and in Africa. What this office will do, it'll coordinate strategy both within our own government, like the CDC and all the agencies that work overseas as well as domestically, and the State Department, the regional bureaus, U.S. foreign aid, to have women's empowerment, which is a good thing, as long as it's not defined as abortion.
Yes, it says the office is here to promote, quote, women's empowerment internationally. Yeah. Well, what does that mean? Have they defined what women's empowerment
that's the problem.
means?
You know, just like Mrs. Clinton when she appeared before our committee in late April, they use words like reproductive health and reproductive rights, which sounds benign until you demand a definition. What do you mean by reproductive health? Under the Bush administration, it meant essential obstetrical services. It meant, good, positive health initiatives.
To keep women alive.
And healthy and strong.
Education
gamut.
And certain opportunities.
In childbirth, it means having safe blood in case hemorrhaging occurs. So that's what we defined it, and that's what the Bush administration defined it. Mrs. Clinton said it means abortion.
This was during a hearing.
This is during a hearing. So what's happened is that, this is boilerplate language that is often in action plans at the United Nations. It's often found in laws in other countries. All of a sudden, they're redefining the terms to say, oh, by the way, what you thought it wasn't. It means abortion. So that, the whole first several months of this Obama administration has been a relentless pro-abortion push embedded throughout the entire government, including in the foreign aid establishment, are all of these pro-abortion people right out of the pro-abortion organizations.
Congressman Smith, I want to speak for the many email correspondents that I'm sure at this moment have their hands on the keyboard, and they are no doubt going to write in and say, this man has pledged to reduce the number of women seeking abortions. He's not pro-abortion. He does not support abortion. You're wrong to say that. He merely supports choice, and he's trying to lower the incidence through his magnanimous social policies. You would say what to that?
President Obama is the abortion president, and he is very well adept at the art of misdirection. Saying something, he does it in other areas. He's talking about reducing the deficit after he has gotten it to almost $2 trillion for this fiscal year. I mean, he says one thing while simultaneously does precisely the opposite. The whole surge, there's a pro-abortion surge going on right now throughout the entire federal government, including in foreign policy, to promote this abortion agenda. At the end of March, at the United Nations, talking about the Millennium Development Goals, some of which are outstanding: reduce maternal mortality, infant mortality. What are we talking about? We're talking about reproductive freedom, reproductive rights, reproductive health. Translated means abortion.
Code word for
all
abortion.
Code word.
So this week we have seen a car czar, a pay czar. Now we have an international abortion czar.
That's what it's shaping up to be. The woman who's heading up the group, The office used to be Mrs. Clinton's chief of staff when she was first lady. So we're dealing with people who, in their heart of hearts, seek to integrate in all of our programs abortion on demand, and that leads to a taint of all of our programs. We're very worried about all of our HIV AIDS programs, $50 billion over the next 5 years. It's a Bush policy that is in the process of being hijacked and integrated. The money now is like some of it, or if not much of it, to the groups who feel they have to integrate the abortion agenda. And our warning to the developing world is say no. This week in Nigeria, one of the states said no and opted in a near unanimous vote not to approve a reproductive health bill, which clearly was defined as an abortion bill.
Do you think they'll pay a penalty in the sense that the United States may withhold some foreign aid for that decision they've made within their own sovereignty?
Well, I believe we will use money as a pressure. We'll work with the European Union, the United Nations, and other international bureaucrats and the big philanthropic organizations. You know, the Gates Foundation, there was a big meeting in London just recently. All these big billionaires came together. You know what their number one issue is? Population control. So in other words, we need to use weapons of mass destruction, and if you look at the number of children who have died from abortion, 50 million in our own country, billions throughout the world. I mean, we're talking billions now, not millions. Abortion is a weapon of mass destruction, and it is a way of keeping the numbers down. It's outrageous. It is anti-human rights. It is anti-child. It is, as Pope John Paul II said so brilliantly, the culture of death. But it is so manipulated, it is so done in such a stealthy way, and that's what we've seen, and that's what we're so worried about with this new
Congressman
office.
Smith, in my recent emails, so many people have written in after your last appearance, and they said, well, that's all fine, well, and good, and it's wonderful that everybody on the show is so pro-life, and Congressman Smith is so pro-life, but he and all of those who are pro-life are merely concerned about the child before it's born. After it's born, no one gives a darn.
Well, Raymond, you know, for 29 years as a member of Congress, and I'm in my 29th year, I have authored legislation on child survival, maternal mortality. I've written laws to beef up the Peace Corps. I wrote our laws that combat human trafficking, sex trafficking, which disproportionately affects women and children in that nefarious slave trade that has proliferated around the world. I wrote the law. I'm the prime sponsor of what's known as the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. I wrote laws against slavery of other types, including in Sudan. So, you know, I have more than 20 major laws. Laws on the whole issue of homelessness for our veterans. Right. I wrote that law. So that is a very cheap shot that is often taken. But I'd like to reverse it. Yeah. Those who say that which is not true, that what about the people who are already born? Right. Well, I turn to those who say, okay, you care about people already born, as do we do passionately. What about the unborn? It's the same person. Birth is an event. It's not the beginning of life. And abortion, properly seen, stripped away from all the euphemisms, is nothing but a violation of a child's human rights, and it wounds the woman, as you've had Alveda King on this show. She's had 2 abortions, and she is passionately saying, don't harm any more women. The baby dies. The woman suffers often for the entirety of her life.
Now, this vote that came out of the Foreign Relations Committee and went to the floor, right?
It did.
This is done. There's no more fighting this?
It moves on to the Senate. My hope is the Senate will look at this language and realize that we cannot allow this office to get up and running and become the war room. You know, the Clintons were great for having war rooms, where they brought everyone together. They had a very coordinated strategy. And if you're working on a benign goal, that's great. But when you're working on child violence, it is awful. And my fear is, and it's justified, they will use this as command and control. Africa, 2003, passed what's called the Maputo Protocol. It is a right to abortion. Many of the African countries that even signed it have said, wait a minute, that's not what we signed up for. We know that next year in Latin America, and it's already starting now by the pro-abortion NGOs in the United States and elsewhere, they want a manifesto, a women's manifesto, which will have all kinds of good human rights for women, equal pay for equal work, all the things you and I care deeply about, and they will try to integrate abortion on demand into that document.
As a human right.
Who do you think is going to be coordinating it? Our U.S. Department of State, I greatly fear, will be out there leading the band telling the Latinos you need to abort your children, and it's contrary to their culture, just like it is to the Africans. It's really contrary to humanity.
Well, keep us posted on what happens in the Senate on this International Abortion Czar front. I want to switch gears for a moment. You've been in the very forefront of a story that concerns an abducted child in Brazil. The mother abducted the child, the mother died.